In this video, Jordan Peterson talks about the role of religion in the development of human beings throughout the history.
The idea that that's associated, like if you look at the standard Marxist and psychoanalytic critiques of the religious process, I think that they radically underestimate the fundamental utility and power of the underlying process, because you can become cynical about it and talk about it in terms of the imposition of a superstitious belief system, and you can talk about it in terms of class struggle and patriarchy and all of those things. But I think that those are valid insofar as everything that human beings do all of the things that human beings do are contaminated with those motives. But I think it's a dreadful mistake to write off the entire metaphysical history of mankind by attributing its existence to some cause, and then to make that cause something that's cynical and destructive. I think it's extremely dangerous, and I think by doing that we risk losing what we actually need to survive, because I think that the sorts of things that the metaphysical speculations that are buried in religious systems teach us they're absolutely vital. You cannot live properly without them. You'll become destructive or suffer from some variety of serious existential, metaphysical, or mental illness. I mean, I've certainly observed in my clinical practice that one of the major contributors to mental illness, it's certainly not the only one, and to physical illness, is the tendency for people to deceive and betray each other. In fact, I don't think there is any factor that plays itself out in human interactions that has more of a causal connection with what we describe as mental illness than the tendency of people to lie to each other and betray each other. And one of the things that's really shocking and surprising to me as a clinician is that those sorts of things are almost never considered as factors in the etiology of mental illness. So, you know, when you talk to someone in psychotherapy and you're trying to straighten out their lives, basically what you're trying to do is to replace falsehood with truth. Now, it isn't like you do that by telling the person what the truth is and having them accept that as some sort of final ideological statement. What you do instead is engage with the person in a form of dialogue that's designed to help them understand exactly what it was that happened and why it happened and what was good about it and what wasn't good about it, and how the things that were good could continue to manifest themselves in the future, and maybe to manifest themselves more powerfully and more strongly and more comprehensively in the future than they had in the past. And as far as I can tell, that's basically what you're doing in psychotherapy, and I think all the evidence points in that direction. I think you can do it for yourself. I mean, one of the things that Jung said about psychotherapy, about psychoanalytic psychotherapy, was that it could be replaced by a sufficient moral effort. So, okay, so what happens is that once God makes man and woman, so what that means in some sense is that once the logos is embodied in something that's flesh, a place for that to be has to be established. And so you might say, well, this is an archetypal story, so the question is, well, what is the archetypal nature of humanity, the essential nature? And the story says the essential nature of humanity is that we're logos clothed in flesh. And I think that that's in accordance with people's own subjective experience. I believe that's how we experience the world, because we see ourselves and perceive ourselves as conscious beings who are capable of transforming potential into reality, and that we're clothed, embodied in something that's mortal and corruptible. And that's partly the opportunity of existence, and partly its peril and burden. And then the question, and this is actually the question that's posed in the story of Adam and Eve, is what then can be done about that? What are the consequences of that, and what can be done about it? And I think that the biblical writings, taken as a comprehensive unit, are the attempt, or one of the prime attempts of mankind to sort out that question and answer it over a period of thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So the first idea is that we're made in the image of God, and that what God is the thing that extracted order from chaos at the beginning of time, and that we partake in that and embody that as we move through life, and that we can choose how to turn potential into actuality, and that we actually choose what kind of reality the potential will be turned into. I think that part of the reason that many cultures have the idea of heaven and hell as well as the idea of the underworld is that the archetypal potential poles for the transformation of potentiality are heaven and hell. If things went as badly as they possibly could, we could turn the we could turn being itself to something that as closely enough resembles hell, so there's no reason to assume that there's any distinction whatsoever. And I think we've had a good taste of that. We had a very good taste of that in the 20th century. And on the opposite pole is whatever we could do if we made things as good as they could possibly be. Now, I think in order to make things as good as they possibly can be, you have to abandon your fear and your resentment, and there's lots of reasons why people can't do that, and some of the primary reasons have to do with the fact of the nature of our being itself, which is that we're conscious co-creators of reality, but we're enveloped in a corruptible envelope, and that's painful and frightening, and in some sense of sufficient mystery to undermine our faith in the entire process. I mean, and that happens to people all the time, especially when they get sick or when things really go badly for them. They wonder, what's the point? Or I was talking to one of my clients the other day about Ivan in the Brothers Karamazov, and I don't know if you've read the Brothers Karamazov, but you definitely should. It's an amazing book. In that book, there's a novice, a monastery novice named Alosha, and he has an older brother named Ivan. And Alosha isn't very verbal, but he's a very good person. And he's trying his best to be divine, I suppose, to be devout and to become a monk. But his older brother, who's extraordinarily intelligent and charismatic, is a rationalist right to the core. And he likes to torment Alosha with all the reasons why believing in some kind of divine reality is weak, naive, and ill-advised. And basically, he continually tells him stories about horrible things that happen in the world, and attempts to force Alosha to justify how, if being is good, those things could possibly occur. And so one of the stories he tells Alosha, which is a story that Dostoevsky got from the newspapers of the time, was that it's a story about a little girl whose parents locked her in an outhouse overnight when it was like freezing outside, and she screamed and cried the entire night because she was locked out there and eventually froze to death. And that became quite a scandal in Russia at that time. And Ivan's basic comment to Alosha was that, as far as he was concerned, the entire course of being up to this point in time wasn't worth that girl's suffering that night, and that there was no way that that could be justified by man nor beast, and fall under the rubric of the assumption that being was good, and that whatever created it was also good. And so Ivan is very good at laying out stories like that. And Alosha has a very difficult time dealing with it, and I think Dostoevsky had his finger on exactly the problem. It's like if life has some sort of transcendent meaning, then why is it pervaded by suffering and evil? That's basically the question that people have been asking since the beginning of time.